Hello and welcome to Video 4. Video 3 partially mentioned the ontology of fiction or the origin or cause of fiction as a subsection of ontology. Because today's video is going to be about the Gospels as fact, the ontology of fiction is used in support to append from the point that the ontology of fiction is a basis that establishes that the Bible and the Gospels are indeed true and factual. The video is also going to cover the direct evidence of God's existence based on the factual thesis statement provided that God's existence can only be demonstrated by God and that God is the individual Jesus Christ. This video lecture, in respect to the direct evidence of God's existence, is going to cover an in-depth analysis of the direct evidence of God's existence, although not in the entirety of one video lecture and may continue in video 5. It should be obvious that considering God exists, there can be no absence of God's existence, and that there can be no absence of evidence for God's existence, as evidence of God's existence, in particular, as the result of evidence for God's existence, is the result or effect of an action or condition that involves God as the result of evidence for God's existence. Video 1 had mentioned the evaluation of the difference between a belief and what is true, as a belief does not have to be based on what is true, and a belief by definition is uncertain or unknown. The uncertainty of a belief is a major problem. In the evaluation that a belief can exist, in the instance nothing is the cause of a belief. Considering that if God is not the source of information concerning his own existence, there is no source of information that can be used in place to assert anything about God's existence. It should be obvious at this point in the lecture that religion shares no connection or relationship to God, as God is not the source of information concerning his own existence in the case of what is defined as religion, as based on belief of what by definition is uncertain or unknown, and asserted. To believe something, and that such a belief becomes a religion, underlines the problem of religion. Thoughts are subject to the limitations of what a person is aware of, and what is fundamentally unknown is subject to the limitation of what cannot be known or is not known, which cannot be thought of, and is the result of the ontology of fiction and fictional characters. The ontology of fiction or fictional characters is based on distinguishing between a or the generally historical figure and a or the fictional character as an abstraction of what is real, actually existing as a thing or occurring in fact, not imagined or supposed. An abstraction is not based on an event or events that have occurred, but an event that is imagined to occur. Because beliefs by their very nature are uncertain, they lack a source for the belief other than the abstraction of what is real. This evaluates that abstractions are false or fictional. They are only the result of the imagination and the abstraction of the perception of what is supposed to actually exist, or what is derived from what exists or occurs as related to a specific fact. The ontology of fiction evaluates that fictional characters are abstractions of real people, or just the idea of people as abstractions that are a result of fictional characters. This is not to say that ontology or the ontology of fiction is an abstraction of a historical figure, but an abstraction of what is real used to create a fictional character. The fundamental problem with religion is that no one throughout the history of a religion has claimed knowledge or associated knowledge with a source. Knowledge cannot be assumed independent of a source, and no knowledge can be assumed about God's existent independent of God as its source. A telltale sign of fiction is that it does not involve true events that have occurred or that are associated with history, real or actual people, and in the case of religion, the beginning of the world. In fact, all false gods in religion are impersonal forces. It should be realized that an impersonal force is not a force anyone could be aware of or has no perception of, in the instance that the force is impersonal, as is characterized by all religions. Considering that false gods have names, of which no person in the history of religion has met, a lack of awareness by a lack of association dictates that religion is itself the result of the ontology of fictional characters, or imagination. To have to carve a god dictates such as man-made. The ontology of fiction evaluates what actually exists, who actually exists, the imagined or products of imagination, and what distinguish products of imagination as they lack events that have actually occurred in which the events are not perceived but imagined. This is not to say that people cannot imagine abstractions of events that involve actual people. The ontology of fictional characters categorically accesses the existent and the non-existent and the cause of fictional characters. In the case of religion, simply from the study of religion itself, all religion lacks any person who has been in communication with God, any event in which God has acted in the history of the religion, any instance in which God has made a statement concerning himself, any instance in which there was a supernatural event that had taken place and that God was responsible for the event. In fact, religion is simply an evaluation of what people do not know. As if anything true influenced religion, there would be no dissimilarity. Video 1 had stated that a denial of proof and evidence does not qualify what determines proof and evidence, as evidence is related to its cause, and evidence of God's existence is related to God, as the cause of evidence and proof for his own existence. This is exactly why the Bible is crucially important, and that it should be obvious that God's existence has therefore been known, obvious, and evident as God himself, Jesus Christ, has interacted with the beings he created from day one. The reason people are primarily unaware of God's involvement in their own life is because they do not adhere to his stipulations and as such are rejected by God because they pursue idols. Video 4, God's existence. In video 1, the factual thesis point was provided that God's existence can only be demonstrated by God and has. The Bible is a collection of 66 books written by 40 individual authors. Out of the 66 books found in the Bible, the 40 authors in 66 books are multiple independent sources. Each book was written independent of any influence of any other writer or other book in the Bible as a source. Logically, since the book was written book by book, and the writers themselves wrote each book individually, the story of how the Bible came to existence is also the work of God. The exact mutual correlation shared between the 66 books determine there is a complete unity of the Bible. Concerning God as its source, there would be no dissimilarity between the authors and their interactions with the exact same God, the actual God of creation. The unity between the books written by 40 authors and its inspiration, the God of creation, that his stipulations remain the same and that he is unchanging and holy, are a result of inspiration, directly coming from God. Inspiration requires two things, a source and a motivation. In summation, considering these sources exist independently, one of the other, the fact that each book is completely consistent should not be possible, unless there is a correlation shared between the writers and their source of information. Unless all information is based on the exact same source, the logical extent of different sources result in different outcomes, and the Bible would be filled with apparent contradictions as a result. However, that is not the case because the God of creation was responsible for the inspiration of the Bible. Logically, considering that no author is the source of another writer's inspiration, the writer's source of inspiration, the information, is not the result of any other writer's influence. Therefore, God is the influence and the inspiration of the Bible, and sources of all information contained in the Bible. This is the reason the Bible does not have the same problem that religion does, abstraction. In chronological order, Moses is the author of the first book of the Bible, Genesis, providing explanation of what happened during Genesis and the beginning of mankind's existence, as well as everything in existence. Revelation is Jesus Christ's revelation to the prophet. In another video, a composition of analyzing the authors of the Bible and biblical content is also conclusive that God exists, and that God is the God of the Bible, and that God is Jesus Christ. Section 2. The direct evidence of God's existence. At this point, it should be obvious that all empirical studies are concerned with proving God's existence. While there is a group of people who have redirected the attempts of actual scholars, geniuses, mathematicians, and philosophers, and any manner of academic dishonesty, did so to redirect the work and intention of attempting to prove God's existence, in the vain pursuit of remaining skeptical or to prevent a means by which God's existence can be established based on the philosophy of science and its original single intent, to prove God's existence. The proposed argument from ignorance is an argument that asserts a lack of contrary evidence or evidence which people are ignorant of is not an appropriate argument for or against God, as what is primarily unknown is a matter of ignorance. However, it was intended as a means by which to assert someone can assert that God somehow fallaciously doesn't exist. The evidence of absence was an argument designed to attempt to fallaciously argue God's existence, as a lack of evidence of any kind that suggests something is missing or that it does not exist. These two arguments were proposed by scientific skeptics as an absurd attempt to rationally disprove God's existence. They have, however, provided the exact framework by which his existence is established as known and where the area of the search for establishing God's existence must begin. So, is there a lack of evidence? The answer is no. Based on the series of logical inductions in video 1, fundamentally nothing can exist without God existing. Something equivalent to a table, if asserted to create the universe, asserts that causes that are perpetually and infinitely dependent define every physical limitation. On the basis of direct evidence, regardless of what is asserted, direct evidence is a qualifier for which of these assertions is actual. The verdict is God does exist, and that alternative assertions are false. The direct evidence of God's existence is his own, Jesus Christ. There are signed affidavits of and from Pontius Pilate, Tiberius Caesar, the Roman guards at Jesus Christ's burial tomb, Greco-Roman literary sources, classical historical accounts, and Jewish and Christian sources, which all definitively determine Jesus Christ was God and that Jesus Christ did raise from the dead. Each one of these sources detail that out exactly as it happened, from the very eyewitnesses that are actual historians and from emperors and a senator of Judea. As stated earlier, a denial of proof and evidence is not the basis for what qualifies proof or evidence. Considering that all sources exist independently of the influence of another, all sources confirm that the Christian sources are accurate and therefore factual. These sources are exhibited in museums, have been officially certified by their local government, and have been verified by historians, curators, and other sources. The actual name of the documents are the senatorial docket, and they are one of the second greatest amounts of proof regarding the Gospels in Rome. The video is going to go ahead and continue in video 5 and evaluate the particular study in depth of direct evidence.